Word target, 180 to 320. Ending hook style. Numerical reveal plus framing that the channel will now explain the mechanism. It is the end of an ordinary day. A man, 59 years old, sits down and pulls off one sock. There is a line pressed into the skin above the ankle, a shallow groove where the elastic has been all day. He presses a thumb into the flesh just above the ankle bone and lifts it, and for a second or two the dent stays. The skin holds the shape of his thumb before it slowly fills back in. His feet feel heavier than they did at breakfast. His shoes were tighter at 5 o'clock than they were at 8 in the morning, and he knows the difference is not in the leather. He has been told what this is. It is age. It is circulation. It is something the years do to the legs of a man who sits at a desk. He half believes it because the dent in the skin and the heaviness in the calves seem like the kind of thing that simply arrives after a certain birthday and stays. But the fluid that pooled in his ankles did not get there because his heart grew weak. His heart pumped all day, every beat, without complaint. The blood went down to his feet under pressure, and most of it came back. What did not come back is a different fluid entirely, moving through a different set of vessels, and those vessels have a problem the arteries and veins do not have. They have no pump. There is no organ anywhere in the body whose job is to drive this fluid upward against gravity. Liters of lymph return to blood per day. Accent color, FFB 100. Every day, somewhere between 2 and 4 liters of fluid leak out of the smallest blood vessels into the tissues of the body and must be carried back. The heart does not carry it back. Nothing with a motor does. And the puzzle this video is going to take apart is how a fluid system with no central pump moves at all, why it slows down after 50, and what single ordinary movement squeezes every vessel of that system in the same instant. Hook to next block. To see why this fluid has no pump and still has to move, the system itself has to be looked at as what it is, not a circuit, but a one-way drainage network borrowing its power from somewhere else entirely. Word target, 450 to 700. Ending hook style, inversion phrase, not damage, absence. Start with where the fluid comes from. At the far end of every artery where the vessel has narrowed to a capillary one-cell wall thick, blood pressure pushes fluid out through the wall into the surrounding tissue. This is not a leak in the sense of a fault. It is the mechanism by which oxygen, water, and nutrients reach the cells. The English physiologist Ernest Starling worked out the balance of forces behind it in the 1890s. Pressure inside the capillary drives fluid out at the front end. The pull of proteins in the blood draws most of it back in at the far end. But the books do not balance. A little more fluid leaves the capillaries than the veins take back. Across the whole body, across a day, that surplus is the 2 to 4 liters. If that surplus simply stayed in the tissues, the body would swell and keep swelling until the pressure stopped the leak by force. It does not because there is a second drainage network laid alongside the blood vessels, finer and blind-ended, that collects the surplus and carries it away. This is the lymphatic system. It begins as microscopic open-ended tubes in the tissue, called lymphatic capillaries, with walls so loosely overlapped that fluid and even whole cells can push in, but cannot easily push back out. The fluid that enters is now called lymph. From there it runs into larger and larger vessels, up through the body, and empties back into the bloodstream at 2 large veins beneath the collarbones. Here is the structural fact that defines everything. The blood has a heart. The lymph has nothing. There is no muscular organ sitting in the middle of this network squeezing it forward. And yet the lymph has to travel, in many places, straight upward against gravity, from the feet to the neck more than a meter, with no pump to push it. The system solves this the way a canal solves the absence of a current. First, the larger lymphatic vessels are divided along their length into segments by one-way valves, flaps that open to let fluid pass upward and snap shut to stop it falling back. The unit between 2 valves is called a lymphangion. Each one is a tiny chamber that can only empty in one direction. Second, the wall of those vessels contains a thin layer of smooth muscle that contracts on its own, rhythmically, squeezing each lymphangion and pushing its contents through the valve above into the next chamber. The vessel is, in a small and slow way, its own pump. But that intrinsic squeeze is weak, and it is nowhere near enough on its own to clear the daily flood. So where does the real power come from? It comes from outside the vessel. Every time a skeletal muscle around a lymph vessel contracts, it swells and presses on the vessel, squeezing the fluid inside it upward through the one-way valves. Every time the muscle relaxes, the segment refills from below. The legs do not have a heart for their lymph. They have the calf muscles, the thigh muscles, the muscles of the foot, and each contraction is one stroke of a pump. The valves make the squeeze count by allowing flow in only one direction. Walk, and the legs pump their own lymph upward, stride by stride. There is one more engine, and it sits at the top. The largest lymphatic vessel, the thoracic duct, runs up through the chest to empty into the vein under the left collarbone. Every breath changes the pressure in the chest and the abdomen. Breathing in drops the pressure in the chest and raises it in the belly, and that difference draws lymph upward through the duct toward the neck, the same way a syringe draws fluid by lowering the pressure ahead of it. The lungs, with every breath, are a suction pump for the fluid the heart left behind. Put those together and the picture inverts. The lymph does not fail to move because something in it is broken. It moves only when something outside it moves. When the muscles are still and the breath is shallow, the fluid is not being damaged. It is simply not being pumped. The swelling at the ankle at the end of a sedentary day is not a sign of disease in the vessels. It is the absence of the one thing those vessels need and cannot supply for themselves: motion from the outside. Hook to next block. If the lymph moves only when the body moves, then the question is not what went wrong with the system, but how much movement the system was built to expect, and how far the modern day falls below it. Word target: 450 to 700. Ending hook style. Sharp summary line. The lymphatic system did not evolve a heart of its own because, for almost all of the history of the body, it never needed one. The body it grew up inside was rarely still. The legs that the lymph drains were walking, climbing, squatting, carrying, standing, shifting weight from one foot to the other through nearly every waking hour. The muscle pump that the lymph depends on was running in the background all day long. The system could afford to have no central engine because the whole moving body was its engine. Consider what that likely meant for a body that once met motion without trying. The amount of walking built into ordinary survival, foraging, hunting, carrying water, working land, is thought to have run to many kilometers a day. Every one of those steps was a contraction of the calf, a squeeze of a column of lymph vessels, a stroke of the pump. Standing and shifting weight kept the foot and leg muscles cycling even at rest. The lymph in the lower body was being moved upward, against gravity, over and over through the day, simply as a byproduct of being alive in a body that had to move to eat. Now set the modern day beside it. A man wakes, and within an hour he is seated. He sits to commute. He sits to work for hours. The calf muscles slack, the foot still, the lymph in his legs standing in its vessels with almost nothing pushing it upward. He sits to eat, sits to drive home, sits to rest in the evening. The total time the lower body muscle pump actually runs in a sedentary day may be only a small part of the hours the body is awake. The vessels are intact, the valves are intact. The intrinsic squeeze of the vessel wall is still ticking over, but the external pump, the one that does the real work, is switched off for most of the day. Active day, value 12,000. Sedentary day, value 3,000. Accent color, #E64A19. This is the gap, and it is mechanical, not a matter of willpower or virtue. The body assumed a baseline of motion the way a building assumes a foundation. It built a drainage system with no pump of its own because it could safely outsource the pumping to a body that was always moving. Take the motion away, and nothing in the vessels has failed, but the power source has simply been unplugged. The fluid that leaks out all day still leaks out. The fluid that should be pumped back is pumped a fraction as often. The surplus settles by gravity into the lowest point available, which at the end of a day spent upright and still is the ankles and the feet. The heaviness in the legs at the end of such a day is not the body wearing out. It is the body doing exactly what its physics dictate when the pump it was designed around is left idle. A body in motion drains itself. A body at rest, hour after hour, lets the fluid sit. The legs do not swell from age. They swell from stillness. Hook to next block. That stillness costs the same at 30 as at 60 in principle, but it does not cost the same in practice. Because by 60, two of the things that kept the lymph moving even during quiet hours have begun to give way. Word target, 300 to 540. Ending hook style. Stakes statement. The general rule so far is that the lymph moves when the body moves. After about 50, two exceptions to the body's favor are quietly withdrawn, and the same amount of sitting starts to cost more than it once did. The first is the muscle itself. From around the age of 50, the body loses skeletal muscle at a rate that runs near 1% of its mass a year, a process called sarcopenia. The calf, the thigh, the muscles of the foot are the very pumps the lower body lymph depends on. As they shrink, each contraction presses on the lymph vessels with less force, and the pump that was already running too rarely in a sedentary day now also runs weaker each time it fires. Less muscle is, directly, less pump. Age in years, muscle mass falls approximately 1% per year. The second is the valves. The one-way valves inside the lymph vessels are what make the squeeze count, by forcing flow in a single direction. With age, those valves can become leaky and incompetent, the same way the valves in the veins of the legs do. A leaky valve lets fluid that was pushed upward fall partway back down between contractions. The pump is not only firing less often and with less force, a fraction of each stroke is now lost back down the vessel. The intrinsic contraction of the vessel wall also slows. Each of these is small on its own. Together they mean the older body needs more external pumping to clear the same daily fluid at exactly the age when it tends to move less. This is the trap, and it closes from both sides. The fluid load does not shrink with age. If anything, the smallest blood vessels may leak a little more freely, but the means of clearing it, the muscle pump, the valves, the vessel's own squeeze, all weaken at once. The result is not only puffy ankles. Stagnant lymph in the tissues means slower clearance of the waste and the inflammatory signals that the fluid carries away, slower recovery, a heavier and stiffer feeling in the limbs, and a standing pool of fluid that the body must work around. The cost of a still day, paid lightly at 30, is paid in full after 50. Hook to next block, which sets up a precise mechanical question. If the problem is a pump that runs too rarely, too weakly, and from too few places, what single movement could turn the pump on everywhere in the body at once? Word target, 600 to 800. Ending hook style. Timeline of measurable changes. The movement is a gentle, rhythmic, whole-body bounce. Standing, the heels lift and the body rises a small distance, then drops back so that the whole frame is briefly loaded and then briefly unloaded, over and over, at a steady rhythm. It can be done on the floor, rising onto the balls of the feet and settling back without the feet ever leaving the ground, and it can be done on a small rebounder, a low trampoline, for those who want a fuller version. Something on the order of 2 to 5 minutes, once or twice a day, is a reasonable starting dose. That is the whole shape of it. The reason it does what no single muscle exercise can do is entirely in the physics. Recall the problem. The lymph is pumped from the outside by muscles, and only where those muscles happen to contract, and only in the direction the valves allow. A calf raise pumps the calf. A squat pumps the legs. But the lymphatic system runs through the entire body, and most exercises pump one region at a time. The rhythmic bounce does something different. It uses gravity as the pump, and gravity acts on every part of the body at once. Follow one cycle. At the top of the bounce, the body is briefly near weightless, the downward force on the tissues at its lowest. Every lymphatic vessel, in the legs, the trunk, the arms, the neck, is momentarily unloaded, and each lymphangion refills from the segment below. Then the body falls and is caught, and for an instant, the load on every tissue rises above normal body weight, 2 to even 3 times it at the bottom of a vigorous bounce. In that instant, every vessel in the body is compressed at once, from the feet to the throat. And the one-way valves do what they are built to do. They let the squeezed fluid pass upward and shut against its falling back. The next rise unloads everything again. Up, and every chamber refills. Down, and every chamber empties upward. Top of bounce, near weightless. Every lymphangion refills. Bottom, 2 to 3 times body weight, every vessel compressed at once, valves drive fluid upward. This is why the claim is not an exaggeration. The bounce does not pump one muscle's worth of lymph. It applies a rising and falling load to the whole column of the body, simultaneously, in rhythm with the one-way valves, so that every lymphangion in the system is being squeezed and refilled in time, many times a minute. It is the closest thing the body has to switching on a central lymph pump, except the pump is gravity and the cylinder is the whole body. The dosage is small on purpose. A few minutes at a steady rhythm can drive a great many compression cycles through the system, because the rhythm is fast, on the order of 2 to 3 bounces a second, and the effect is the cumulative total of the strokes, not the height of any one of them. The bounce does not need to be high. A gentle rise onto the balls of the feet, heels lifting a centimeter or two and dropping back, is meant to deliver the load cycle with little strain on the knees or the back. Higher is not the goal. Rhythm and repetition are the goal. The breath should stay slow and steady because the breathing pump at the thoracic duct is working in the background the whole time, drawing the rising lymph the last stretch up into the veins of the neck. The setup is plain. Stand with the feet under the hips, knees soft and never locked. Begin with a small rise onto the balls of the feet, letting the heels drop back down in rhythm, or use a low rebounder and bounce without the feet leaving its surface. Keep the movement gentle and even. For anyone with a balance concern, do it beside a counter or a wall with a hand resting on it, which removes the fall risk entirely and changes nothing about the pumping. 2 to 3 minutes is a reasonable dose. Done in the morning, the idea is to clear the night's settled fluid and prime the legs for the day. Done in the evening, it is meant to clear the day's accumulation before the night. The timeline of what changes tends to be staged, and much of it is reported as something felt directly. Many people describe the legs feeling lighter and warmer within the first few minutes of an early session, as if the standing pool of fluid were being driven upward and the tissues draining. Over the first days of doing it once or twice daily, the evening heaviness and the sock-line dent at the ankle often ease, consistent with lymph being cleared on a schedule instead of left to sit through every sedentary hour. Over the first weeks, the cumulative effect of moving the daily fluid load more reliably is generally described as less standing edema, a lighter and more mobile feeling in the limbs, and faster clearance of the waste the lymph carries. None of this is a cure for a damaged valve or a treatment for disease. It is the restoration of the one input the system was built around and the modern day removed. A regular, whole-body, rhythmic compression that drives every vessel at once. Hook to next block. What makes the bounce work is not that it is special. It is that it hands the body back a signal the body was always supposed to receive for free. And that reframes what the whole lymphatic system actually is. Word target: 300 to 450. Ending hook style: short philosophical sentence echoing Feynman. Step back from the vessels and the valves and look at what the body has actually been doing. It built a drainage system that carries a flood of fluid upward against gravity every day, and it gave that system no engine of its own. That looks at first like an oversight. A pump with no motor, a canal with no current. It is not an oversight. It is a design decision the body could safely make because it assumed it would never stop moving. The lymphatic system did not need a heart because the moving body was its heart. Every step, every shift of weight, every breath was a stroke of a distributed pump that ran for free as long as the body did what bodies once did all day, which was move. The system was never meant to run itself. It was meant to be run by motion. So the swelling, the heaviness, the dent that holds the shape of a thumb was never the body failing. It was the body keeping a promise the modern day broke on its behalf. The vessels are still waiting for the motion they were built around. Hand it back to them, even for 3 minutes of rhythmic bounce, and the whole column drains in time, exactly as designed, because the missing piece was never inside the body at all. It was the movement the body assumed. This channel recently took apart another version of this same idea, the body running on an internal schedule that it expects the day to supply, and quietly losing function when the day does not. If a drainage system with no pump of its own made sense here, the way the body's whole daily clock depends on signals it no longer reliably receives follows the same logic, and that one is worth watching next. The lymph was never asking for an organ to drive it. It was asking for a body in motion. The body does not maintain itself automatically. It maintains itself in response to the mechanical signals it is given, and a few minutes of rising and falling against gravity is one of the simplest signals it has ever needed.